And now I want to start talking about hard-coded scripts as well as dialog boxes. Okay, so 101 ACL applications, but we have 100 of these reports all hard-coded, has all the scripts, the audit objectives, everything in there, and it also has a book. And I wanted to show you the book a bit before jumping into any more discussion here. And bear with me just one second here as I switch over to that book. Okay, so the motivation behind the book, by the way, and it's hard for you to read all of this online, but it was really to say, hey, it's 9 a.m., you just started up ACL, you don't know what to do, and you need to start running some reports because your manager said it's time to get started. So we have our 7 steps to Power Applications, which is what we talked about a bit before. But let me kind of go down to one of these applications so that you can get an idea. And I think let me see if this will work for me today. And probably not, so that made it hard for me. Bear with me one second. So let me just go down to one of these scripts. Try to find this for you. And the reason I do this is I'm also a big believer in documentation, and I just feel as though that documentation is a very useful step and something that unfortunately, especially in scripting, you can forget about. And this is a script that we're going to talk about a lot today. This is calculating a weighted days payable outstanding. It's accounts payable 11. I've renamed it in our scripting, but it's accounts payable 11. And I wanted to show you how I outlined my test. And what we used to call these are test sets, or part of a toolbox. And again, there's over 100 of them in this book. So taking a look at this, we have basically the overview of what we're trying to do in the test, the audit objective being tested, the data fields that we need in order to run that particular test. And those are there are about 5 of them there, by the way: check amount, discount, check date, invoice date, vendor name. And then we have the batch, which I go into a lot of depth here, and you could see our interest rate was back in 1997 was up to about 7% at banks, I believe, or maybe that was the lending rate. But these days rates have gone down in the U.S. quite a bit. But as you look at this, it explains a lot of the code, and we're going to talk about how to build some of these fields that we're talking about. I don't know if you have to document it as well as I did in the book. I mean, that may be a little bit too much, but I think even just to have a copy of the script in a Word document after your audit objectives and data fields that you need, and last but not least, even having a bit of the audit steps that you might want to perform on those script results, I think would be a very useful thing to have. And again, it just helps in passing along this information to others. Now, the one thing that we did not have in 101 ACL applications, but we had in later tool sets, was the use of the dialog boxes. So what we had to do was hard code everything into ACL. So if you had the word vendor name and check amount and invoice date and check date, these were fields that you had to rename your file and your fields to look like that. So let's kind of go back into ACL and kind of show you what I'm talking about there. So I have the Ven Interest 101, and we're going to talk later about the Ven Interest Payables test set. This one has dialog boxes. This one does not. So let's take a look at that one here. Notice here it's opening up a file called Paid File. Notice my file is called Paid File. If it's called Paid File 1 here, this thing will not run. When I open up the Paid File and take a look, notice the check amount field is there. Notice this is the check amount field. So again, I think everyone understands we need to hard code this script, and what I find that you need to do in order to get this to run properly is you have to do a bit of a control find. So if you're sitting here and saying, well, I don't know why you'd want to do this. Personally, I think it's easier to change the field's name that you're using as opposed to changing it in the script. Another thing that you could do, and what we would used to do, is let's say this was called let's say the client, actually, bear with me 1 minute. I just know ACL is going to bark at me. You need to close your view before you do this. If, let's say, in my table layout, the check amount was instead called something like, APX 0015 CHK. And we all know that to be known as check amount, but it's not really called check amount in the file. What you can do is create a new expression or a calculated field, and in the default value put APX 001 CHK, and then in the name just call it check amount. So all I'm doing here is I'm creating like a temporary calculated field called check amount, so my script will run, but I'm not impacting the file structure in any way. Of course, I didn't test this for today, so it'll probably bomb on me, but here we go. So I'm going to run the Ven Interest 101, and sure enough, it ran through perfectly. Even though I had a field in there called, some crazy name, it was able to still run that script. I'm not going to worry too much about the results here right now. The point is, it ran all of this code based on data files that we had previously set up, with a few changes. The 101 ACL application, the approach to the scripts were to rename files to equal the script table names, to rename the fields to equal the field names, and then adjust the variables in the script as you need to. So we're going to talk about the variables part next, but I wanted to just note that if you had a variable in there like an interest rate of 7%, that you would need to adjust that to say 3% or 2% or whatever it is today. And yeah, maybe what I'll do is I'm going to now we're going to talk about the vendor interest payables test set version. And the payables test set is also a book out there that you can get. But again, if you sign up for a lot of our subscriptions, you get it for free these days. So maybe take a look at that as well. It has the same functionality that we had in 101. It can be universally applied though, because you select the data table, the data fields, and you get to set the interest rate as well. So we're not going to do that. And what we're now going to do is go into ACL and take a look at the vendor interest payables test set. And I have a few of these built already. And what we'll then talk about is, essentially how to rebuild some of these ourselves. So let's just kind of take a look at this script here, and then I'm going to open up the Vendor Interest 101 script as well so that you can kind of see the differential. So one thing you'll notice, and it may be a little hard to do this on the fly here to be honest, but we have like open paid file here. And then this one, we have the open input file here. So that's one way to kind of see the differential. And what is the input file? So let's take a look at this dialog box, this first one here. And the dialog box basically opens up and says, compute lost interest and days outstanding. Step 1, select paid invoice file. So you can double click on that and you have the variable input. And it came from these categories that we were able to select. And we're going to rebuild this in a second, but I just wanted to show you that. Let me discard that. And then the next thing we're going to show in a dialog box setting is the selection of the fields, as well as putting in an interest rate. So invoice date, I called it description 1. Probably should have named it a bit better. Vendor name, description 3, check date, description 2, etc. Field 1 and probably field 2 or discount. And then the enter discount percentage, I put in percent. So again, probably a best practice that was not in here at the time was to put check date here and maybe check underscore date or V. Probably a nice thing to put would be like V check date, something like that. So variable check date. But for now, we're just going to go with it as is. And once those inputs are set up, you can then utilize ACL to then essentially kind of open up the table and go through and recalculate all of the things that we did in this here. So again, not going through it in detail, but you can kind of see a lot of it's the same. Now the one difference as you look at this is that I'm putting these percentage marks around the variable names. So we have %1 equivalent to the percentage divided by 100. And we'll talk a little bit about this in a second in defining fields. We'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes on this. But you notice here, the only thing I'm trying to get across is that whenever we use a field in a script, we're going to actually put them in between percentage marks. So this was, I think, like, check date minus invoice date. This was the check amount field. Again, check date minus invoice date. And onward here. So as you kind of see the input file, we also had in percentage marks as well. So let me run through the script just to kind of show you what I always like to do is I practice what I preach. I always like to run this, and kind of see what it looks like. It gives me this first statement. We'll talk about this in a minute. The application will summarize vendor activity with weighted days payable outstanding. Okay, that's interesting. So then we're going to select the paid file because we know that. We could call it anything, by the way. It could have been called check invoice file 2012. It's going to still work because we're using variables in the script. Invoice date, vendor name, discount field, invoice amount field, which I guess in this case I'm going to even get crazy here and pick that different field name, and then check date, and interest percentage maybe I'll put in 3% because it's probably a little more accurate. And it ran through and it gives me this pause statement, days payable outstanding, it's been calculated, and we even stratified some stuff in the window here. So if I go back here and I look for my last stratify statement, which is here, I can double click on the stratify statement and you can actually see the actual stratification that I created. Okay, so let's now go back and say, well, what happened there? What did we do to create that script? And again, why I like giving you some of these sample scripts here, not only the ones we created, but also some of the pre-made ones, because it really gives you an opportunity to go through some of the scripts that we've built and try to understand more how variables are defined and how ACL works behind the scenes. Okay, so let me select this payables test set. Okay, so now that we're in here, notice the first thing that came up was this pause statement. And let me rerun this pause statement so you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to put the pause statement in my command line. By the way, the command line, which is here, is something that I can go to Window, Show Command Line whenever I'd like. I can write, just kind of put that in there, copy and paste it. It looks a little funky, but it'll work. I can hit my run button and look at that. It gives me a bit of a pause statement. I like putting pause statements at the beginning and end. They may be annoying to some people, but I think it's kind of nice to watch and read what you're about to do, and then when you're done, have it tell you, oh, by the way, we created this file and we did this and we did that, and all of that is now part of the actual script itself and part of documentation. Okay, now what I'm going to do is redo this dialog box here. So I'm going to actually comment out this dialog box, which this one is where we select the file. Notice it has this select file here. Okay, so what I'm going to now do is I'm going to basically build a new dialog, which is up here, build new dialog, and I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger so people can see that. And what we'll then do is you could do a few different things here, but I'm just going to kind of keep it simple. We'll maybe what I'll do first off is just kind of walk you through quickly. What you can do is you could add those text boxes just to explain select invoice payments table. And that's just a little note. So let me just double click on that again. You have the ability to set the X and Y position of where it's going to be. You can do left, you can do center it, maybe center it in the middle there if you'd like. And then you could enter an edit box, which is like a little bit of a just putting in a name in there, or a variable name, or in this case we put in the interest rate. You could do a checkbox, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but just noting that. You could put a radio button, again, a little bit later, but you could do that. You can also do this one, drop-down list. And the drop-down list will allow you to actually select items on a list, which might be, maybe scripts that you want to run or reports you want to run. But you only get to select one. The radio box, you only get to select one. The checkbox, you could, set up 10 checkboxes here, and you could select each checkbox. The last thing, which is what we're going to talk about, so I wanted to go through all these first, is the project item list, and we'll select that. And then I can click on so notice my cursor changed, and it changed into a little box, and I can then click here, and I can call this input. So my variable name is going to be called input. Now, what I can select based on that are a variety of things. I'm going to select tables just to keep it simple, but I could select a character field, date fields, scripts, tables, views, all these different things. But we're just going to select table and click the add button, and that adds it over here, and hit the OK button. I could, by the way, I should note this, in the default setting, you could say, you could put, select table, paid table, or something like that. And then that kind of tells people what it is and what they should select there. You kind of set it up here already, but this is useful. I have to say, if you needed to put in a date format, so if you said, I want you to enter a date in here, this is how I would normally put the default setting, like, this is how I want you to enter the date in, and then it tells people, oh, okay, you want me to put year, 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 month, month, day, day. Let me destroy the default, keep it blank, and we'll just have select payments table. Now what that's going to do, and I'll just clean this up a little bit so it's a little tighter, is now we are able to select the input variable, and that's going to be a table, and then that input variable is going to be utilized by this script. So here is our dialog box here. To view a dialog box later, you can double click on it and select this button, Edit Command, and that'll bring you right back to there. I commented it out at our old one, and then I do have the open input file here. So what this dialog, this project dialog does is it reaches into the project itself so that you can grab tables and fields and all those good things. So let's run this vendor interest PTS again. Again, gives me the pause statement. Notice this is the new dialog that I've set up. I'm going to select the paid file, and it continues on, with the script here. I guess I'm going to cancel out of this. If I cancel out, it'll say, do you want to cancel? You say yes, and you're back to your paid file here. So, with all that said, that is how to set up a dialog box, and also the difference between something like in the payables test set that you get and something that you could get within the 101 ACL applications, where you need to hard code everything. In this one, you don't need to hard code anything. You just have to be very careful and utilize the actual variables surrounded by percentage marks throughout the script itself. So no hard-coded field names when you do that.